There's a strange thing happening right now that almost nobody in Washington wants to say out loud, and it's this. The country that has been treated as untouchable in American politics for 3 generations is losing its grip. Not because of some external enemy, but because the people who used to defend it without question are quietly stepping back. And once you start pulling on that thread, you realize the whole architecture built around Greater Israel, the idea that one state should permanently control the land from the river to the sea, is starting to come apart at the seams. Let's start with what's actually visible, the part you can measure. Go back just a couple of weeks to the primary elections in Manhattan. This is about as safe a political environment as exists for unconditional support of Israel. Wealthy, connected, deeply tied into the old donor networks. And what happened? Every candidate who ran on a platform critical of unconditional U.S. backing for Israel won. Not narrowly, decisively. There was even a race where 2 Jewish candidates ran against each other, and the one who said American support for Israel had gone too far is the one who came out on top. 10 years ago, that result would have been unthinkable. Today, it barely makes the front page because it's part of a pattern, not an outlier. And the pattern goes well beyond Jewish American voters, where support for the current Israeli government's conduct has been dropping for years now, especially among younger generations. The bigger shock, frankly, is what's happening with Christian evangelicals. The group that has functioned as Israel's most reliable, highest turnout political base in this country for decades. That coalition isn't disappearing overnight, but it's fracturing. Younger evangelicals are watching the same footage everyone else is watching: the bombing campaigns, the displacement, the home demolitions in the West Bank. And a good number of them are starting to ask whether what they're seeing has anything to do with the faith they were raised in. When the theological foundation of a political alliance starts to wobble, the alliance doesn't survive forever on habit alone. Then zoom out to the rest of the world, because this is where it gets even starker. Pew and other major international polling outfits have been tracking favorability toward Israel across dozens of countries, and the trend line is about as one-directional as you'll ever see in public opinion data. Steadily down, region after region, including in countries that have historically been neutral or even friendly. People have watched in real time on every phone screen on the planet a level of destruction and civilian death in Gaza that's almost impossible to rationalize, and then watched the same approach extend into the West Bank and into southern Lebanon. You can only ask the rest of the world to look away for so long before global opinion simply refuses to cooperate anymore. So, here's the uncomfortable bottom line. Outside of the United States government and arguably Germany, for reasons rooted entirely in its own 20th century history rather than anything happening today, there is no major institutional backer left standing, and even the American relationship, the load-bearing pillar of the entire structure, is showing real cracks for the first time in living memory. To understand why this conflict continues to shape global politics, it is necessary to step back from today's headlines and examine the historical and political foundations that have influenced events for decades. The current crisis did not emerge overnight, nor can it be explained solely through the most recent military confrontations. Instead, it reflects a series of competing national visions, unresolved territorial disputes, failed diplomatic efforts, and regional power struggles that stretch back generations. One concept frequently discussed in political analysis is the idea often referred to as Greater Israel. The term itself carries different meanings depending on who uses it. For some religious groups, it represents a biblical aspiration, while for certain political movements, it has referred to maintaining permanent Israeli sovereignty over territories captured during the 1967 Six-Day War, including the West Bank and other disputed areas. Critics argue that this vision conflicts directly with the creation of an independent Palestinian state, while supporters contend that these territories are historically and strategically essential to Israel's long-term security. This debate is not merely theoretical. Various Israeli political parties have, over different periods, adopted platforms that emphasize permanent Israeli sovereignty over land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. One of the most frequently cited examples is the original platform of the Likud party, which opposed the establishment of another sovereign state west of the Jordan River. At the same time, Israeli politics has never been monolithic. Different governments, coalition partners, and political leaders have held varying positions regarding settlements, negotiations, territorial compromise, and the future of Palestinian self-government. Understanding these competing visions also helps explain why the two-state solution has remained so elusive despite decades of international diplomacy. Since the early 1990s, successive American administrations have publicly endorsed the creation of two states living side by side in peace and security. Yet, negotiations repeatedly stalled over issues that remain deeply contested today: borders, settlements, Jerusalem, security guarantees, refugees, and mutual recognition. Each breakdown has further deepened mistrust between both societies, while making future compromises increasingly difficult. The territorial landscape itself has changed dramatically over time. The United Nations Partition Plan of 1947 proposed separate Jewish and Arab states, but the proposal was rejected by Arab leaders while accepted by Jewish leadership. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War fundamentally altered those boundaries, expanding Israeli-controlled territory beyond the original UN proposal. The Six-Day War in 1967 produced another major transformation, bringing the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, Golan Heights, and Sinai Peninsula under Israeli control. While Israel later returned Sinai to Egypt as part of the peace agreement, the status of the remaining territories continues to define the conflict today. These historical developments inevitably raise difficult questions about the future political status of millions of Palestinians living in territories under varying degrees of Israeli control. Scholars, policymakers, and international organizations have long debated several possible outcomes. One possibility is the establishment of an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel. Another is a single democratic state with equal citizenship and voting rights for all residents. Others describe the current reality as an extended interim arrangement characterized by military occupation, limited Palestinian self-rule in some areas, continued settlement expansion, and recurring cycles of violence. Each of these possibilities carries profound political, demographic, legal, and security implications. Many analysts argue that the absence of a lasting political settlement contributes directly to recurring instability throughout the region. From this perspective, unresolved questions surrounding Palestinian self-determination continue to fuel resentment, radicalization, and periodic armed conflict. Others counter that militant organizations, regional rivalries, and broader ideological conflicts would continue to generate instability regardless of territorial compromises. These competing interpretations remain central to debates among historians, diplomats, and security experts. The wider regional picture also cannot be understood without considering the broader strategic competition involving countries such as Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. Over the past several decades, successive American administrations have justified military interventions or strategic pressure using a variety of reasons, including counterterrorism, preventing weapons proliferation, regional stability, and protecting allies. Critics have argued that these interventions also aligned with broader geopolitical objectives related to reshaping the balance of power in the Middle East, while supporters maintain they were driven primarily by national security concerns and responses to specific threats. The 2003 invasion of Iraq remains one of the most debated examples. The publicly stated justification centered on concerns over weapons of mass destruction and alleged security threats, claims that later became the subject of extensive criticism after such weapons were not found. Since then, scholars have continued to debate the broader strategic motivations behind the war, including questions about regional influence, energy security, counterterrorism, and the future political order of the Middle East. Similarly, the prolonged conflict in Syria and the continuing tensions involving Iran have become intertwined with broader regional rivalries involving Israel, the United States, Gulf Arab states, Russia, and various non-state actors. While contemporary policy discussions often focus on nuclear proliferation, ballistic missile programs, proxy groups, and regional deterrence, many observers argue that the unresolved Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains an important underlying factor shaping political dynamics across the region. At its core, the debate increasingly revolves around one fundamental question: What long-term political arrangement can provide both security and legitimacy for everyone living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea? Supporters of a negotiated two-state solution argue that separate sovereign states remain the most realistic path toward preserving both Israeli and Palestinian national aspirations. Others advocate a single democratic state, built upon equal citizenship, regardless of ethnicity or religion, although many analysts acknowledge the enormous political and practical challenges such a transformation would face. What receives broad recognition among many international observers is that maintaining the current status quo indefinitely presents significant challenges. Continued military occupation, expanding settlements, recurring violence, humanitarian concerns, security threats, and political polarization all contribute to an environment in which each passing year makes compromise increasingly difficult. At the same time, Israeli leaders continue to emphasize legitimate security concerns arising from terrorism, rocket attacks, hostage crises, and regional hostility, concerns that remain central to Israeli public opinion. International attitudes have also evolved over time. Images emerging from recent conflicts, humanitarian conditions in Gaza, continued settlement expansion in parts of the West Bank, military operations across the region, and shifting public opinion have generated renewed global debate regarding the future direction of the conflict. Polling in many countries suggests growing divisions over policy approaches, while domestic political debates within Israel, the United States, Europe, and the wider Middle East continue to reflect increasingly diverse perspectives. Ultimately, the central challenge remains unchanged after decades of diplomacy and conflict. Lasting peace requires a political framework capable of addressing the security concerns of Israelis while also recognizing the political rights, dignity, and aspirations of Palestinians. Whether that future ultimately takes the form of two sovereign states, one shared democratic state, or another negotiated constitutional arrangement remains deeply contested. What is widely acknowledged, however, is that without a durable political solution accepted by both peoples, cycles of violence, instability, and international tension are likely to continue shaping the region for years to come.